also. And with that, Emily, whenever you're ready, you can begin.
All right, so today I'm going to be talking about type 1 diabetes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So a little bit about me. I have 2 endocrine disorders, them being hypothyroid and type 1 diabetes, which is why I'm here today. And so I am pretty knowledgeable about it as I've had it for about 10 years, and I am pretty well versed in the current technology being used to treat type 1 diabetes. I currently use a CGM, which is a continuous glucose monitor, and I've recently switched to a new pumping system. So I've had experience with 2 different types of insulin pumps, as well as manual ways to treat the disease. So I'm pretty knowledgeable on the topic. So now we're going to be talking a little bit about the endocrine system, which is the system that diabetes deals with. So the functions of the endocrine system are regulating respiration, metabolism, reproduction, sensory perception, movement, sexual development, and growth, among others, but those are the main ones. And so the endocrine system has a bunch of glands, and that's kind of what it does. And so we're going to do like a little overview of the glands. So first we have the hypothalamus, which is the part of the brain that produces hormones that controls body temp, hunger, mood, sleep, thirst, and a bunch of other things. And so the hypothalamus is also responsible for triggering the release of hormones from other glands. So whenever you think about hypothalamus, think of the 2 H's, hormones and homeostasis. Next is the pituitary gland. This is separated into 2 sections, the posterior and anterior pituitary gland. And so this is also called the master gland because it kind of just controls the activity of the other hormone secreting glands. So next we have the parathyroid gland, and this regulates your calcium levels. And I'm sure if you've taken an anatomy class, your teacher has probably used this as an example of a negative feedback loop. And then next we have the pancreas. It's our little superstar here. It is a banana-shaped organ that hangs out behind the stomach. This organ is also included in the digestive system, but today we're only going to be talking about its role in the endocrine system. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into the pancreas, but this is just a little overview to get the ball rolling. All right, and then we have our thyroid. I also have some problems with our thyroid friend, but we don't have enough time to get into that. So whenever you think of the thyroid, you're going to think about metabolism. So the thyroid produces the thyroid hormone, very creative. This hormone is produced with iodine. So next we have our adrenal glands, which are located on top of each kidney, and they produce a bunch of hormones, including adrenaline and cortisol. So no one is really sure what the pineal gland's purpose actually is, but we do know that the pineal gland produces the very popular hormone melatonin, which helps you go to sleep. And then finally, we have our ovaries and testes. They produce female and male reproductive hormones, respectively. They also produce quite a few other hormones, but those are more often talked about in the reproductive system. So like I said, we're going to be focusing on one of those in particular today, and that is the organ called the pancreas. So the pancreas is our banana-shaped friend that resides behind the stomach. It is spongy and about 6 to 10 inches long. This diagram here provides a pretty simple anatomy of the pancreas with its respective sections, the head, neck, body, and tail. There are multiple major blood vessels that surround the pancreas: the superior mesenteric artery, the superior mesenteric vein, the portal vein, and the celiac axis. Supplying blood to the pancreas, those supply blood to the pancreas and other abdominal organs. So the endocrine portion of our pancreas consists of islet cells that create and directly release hormones into the bloodstream. 2 of the main hormones the pancreas releases are insulin and glucagon. Insulin and glucagon are like each other's foil characters. A foil character is a character who contrasts with another character. A great example of this is Romeo and Mercutio from Romeo and Juliet. Anyways, insulin works to lower blood sugar, while glucagon does the opposite and acts to raise blood sugar. These 2 hormones work together in a negative feedback loop to stabilize the blood sugar. So here is a macroscopic anatomy of the pancreas on a much more detailed level compared to our last look at the pancreas. So we did talk about islet cells briefly before, but there are 4 types of cells within these islets. So you have the alpha cell, which produces the hormone glucagon and makes up approximately 20% of each islet. The beta cell produces the hormone insulin and makes up approximately 75% of each islet. And the next 2 are not commonly as talked about, but they are still there and hopefully do their job. So you have the delta cell, which accounts for 4% of the islets cells and secretes the peptide hormone somatostatin, and the pancreatic polypeptide cell accounts for about 1% of the islet cells and secretes the pancreatic polypeptide hormone. The pancreas also does release enzymes that help aid in digestion. They break down carbs, fats, proteins, nucleotides, ions, and water, but these are more commonly talked about whenever you're talking about digestion. So now we're going to be moving into the bulk of our presentation, type 1 diabetes. So just a little overview. Over 1.25 million people have type 1 diabetes in America alone. 200,000 of those people are under the age of 20. So type 2 diabetes affects the way the body processes glucose and can often be initiated by obesity. And type 1 diabetes, which we will go into in more depth, is when the body can no longer produce insulin due to the immune system attacking the body's beta cells. So those are pretty different, but they both deal with insulin and glucagon, so they're both labeled diabetes. So here's a very basic overview of type 1 diabetes. So type 1 diabetes is where the body produces little to no insulin. So as we've addressed, insulin works to lower the blood sugar in response to food, and it also turns that glucose into energy the body can use. Oftentimes with type 1 diabetes, the pancreas cannot produce glucagon, which will raise the blood sugar in response to elevated insulin levels, which makes the person with diabetes responsible for monitoring their blood sugar and treating low blood sugar with quick sugars such as juice or glucose tablets. The ideal blood sugar is between 100 and 180. A high blood sugar is usually above 180, but for a type 1 diabetic, it can be defined by the patient and their doctor. I'm going to use myself as an example. Whenever I was first diagnosed, over 250 was considered high, but after like 10 years of having this disease, above 130 is considered high for me. This changes because of the patient's ability to easily regulate their blood sugar, and the point of having this change in the goal blood sugar is not to overwhelm the patient and give them attainable goals. So here's some pretty common symptoms of type 1 diabetes: thirst, hunger, unintended weight loss, and fatigue. The others include irritability or other mood changes, blurred vision, and frequent urination. One telltale sign that these pretty common symptoms are type 1 diabetes is from the presentation of these multiple symptoms at once. It is considerably irregular for someone to not have any energy to do activity with a substantial increase in their hunger, but also experience extreme weight loss. This is where the diagnostician will use their critical thinking skills to narrow down the diagnosis, and then they will confirm their hunch with tests such as a finger stick to see the patient's blood sugar. So now we're going to be moving on to some more dangerous symptoms and products of type 1 diabetes. So first we have diabetic ketoacidosis, or DKA. So this is whenever your body can't get enough glucose for fuel, so it'll break down your fat cells instead. This will create chemicals called ketones. Your liver releases the sugar to help out, but your body can't use it without insulin, so it builds up in your blood along with the acidic ketones. This mix of extra glucose, dehydration, and acid buildup is known as ketoacidosis and can be life-threatening if not treated right away. On the opposite end of the spectrum, when the blood sugar becomes too low, type 1 diabetics will present with an irregular or fast heartbeat, pale skin, fatigue, irritability, or other symptoms. I personally feel a sort of chest feeling that feels very heavy and usually comes all of a sudden, and sometimes the symptoms come before the meter will even read the low blood sugar. As the blood sugar continues to fall, there can be risks of seizures or going into a coma, and the way to treat that, like I said, is through quick sugar, such as juice or glucose tablets. So, as we have discussed before, insulin circulates, allowing sugar to enter your cells. As your blood sugar drops, the secretion of insulin naturally drops. And then whenever there are enough islet cells destroyed, your body will no longer produce insulin. And so, in turn, glucose is the main source of energy for cells. This comes from food and your liver, and it can enter your cells with the help of insulin. So whenever you cannot make insulin, your glucose can't get in the cells, and that just kind of builds up and causes type 1 diabetes. So there is no actual direct cause that we can find of why diabetes happens because it is an autoimmune disorder. So an autoimmune disease is a condition in which your immune system mistakenly attacks your body. As we know, the immune system normally guards against germs like bacteria and viruses. When it senses one of these, it will send out a militia of fighter cells to attack them. So normally, your immune system can tell the difference between foreign cells and your own cells. But in an autoimmune disease, the immune system mistakenly attacks a part of your body and sees it as foreign and releases these proteins to attack those healthy cells. So in type 1 diabetes, an infection or another trigger causes the body to mistakenly attack the beta cells in the pancreas that make insulin. A lot of people ask if there is any way to prevent type 1 diabetes, and the answer to that is no. There is no known prevention to type 1 diabetes or any autoimmune disorder for that matter. I did have a family friend tell us that I had whole milk as a child, and that was the reason I got diabetes. So who knows, maybe we do need to do a study on whole milk to type 1 diabetes pipeline. So next we have our treatment of type 1 diabetes. So the main treatment for type 1 diabetes is insulin. There are many different types and brands. Two of the most common brands are Humalog or Novolog. Those are both fast-acting insulins, and they're both very expensive. So there are cheaper options that may not be as effective. From my experience, Novolog works better for me, but my insurance will only cover Humalog, so we do have to settle. There are multiple different types of insulin. This is not the same as brand. So there is short-acting insulin, which will be administered as a correction dosage for high blood sugar or at meal times. There's rapid-acting insulin, which is similar to short-acting, but it works a lot faster and stays in the system for a shorter amount of time. Then there's intermediate-acting insulin. This contains buffers that make them work over a long time. And then there's long-acting insulin, which will have no peak and can last for up to 24 hours. Most diabetics will usually use short-acting and long-acting insulin. Long-acting insulin is administered at the same time each day and is supposed to keep the blood sugar stable like a pancreas. So here are some terms that are used a lot when describing the effect of a certain type of insulin. Onset is how long it takes the insulin to reach your bloodstream and begin lowering your blood sugar. Peak time is when the insulin is doing the most work in terms of lowering your blood sugar. Duration is how long it keeps working after onset. And those are just some key vocab terms. So now moving on to the management of type 1 diabetes. In addition to taking insulin, this includes managing your low blood sugar. As we've talked about, managing low blood sugar is done by taking a quick sugar, such as juice or glucose tabs. And exercise is also important to the management of type 1 diabetes. Exercise is important to anyone's well-being, but it is included in newer treatment plans for type 1 diabetics because of the previous notions that type 1 diabetics should not exercise, for it would risk low blood sugar. We now know that low blood sugar can be easily treated, and that type 1 diabetics can exercise just like everyone else. One very important topic when discussing type 1 diabetes is food. A lot of people who don't know much about diabetes will think that type 1 diabetics can't eat any sugar and have to be on a low carb or keto diet. This is absolutely not true. Everyone does need carbs. I can eat the same thing as anyone else. All I have to do is give myself insulin for it. I like to give people the analogy that I can eat cake for breakfast every single day and give myself medicine for it, and I would be fine. So now we're going to be moving on to the technology that treats type 1 diabetes. So these are just some common technology that treats type 1 diabetes, and we're going to be getting into each of them in detail. So starting off with CGMs, or continuous glucose monitors, these continuously monitor the blood sugar. This replaces the need to do finger sticks to check the blood sugar. At the top here, we have the Freestyle Libre, and in the left-hand corner, there is an example of the Dexcom system. These are the two most widely used CGMs. I'm very familiar with the Dexcom, as that's the system that I use. This big contraption right here, labeled by number 1, will inject the device, and then the device labeled by number 2 will constantly read the blood sugar, sending in a new reading every 5 minutes. It can connect to smartphones, smartwatches, and some insulin pumps. The insertion is pretty painless in my opinion, and this is an amazing tool for type 1 diabetes management. The Freestyle Libre I'm not as familiar with, but it does use this thing here. It's your insertion point, and you put it on your arm or any subcutaneous tissue, and then you can use your meter and swipe it over that point, and it will read your blood sugar. Next, we have insulin pumps. So there are a lot of different types of insulin pumps. So this is just a picture depicting a few different types. Insulin pumps will use fast-acting insulin on a continuous drip in place of long-acting insulin, and will give a dose of insulin on demand when the user eats or needs to correct their blood sugar. I've had an experience on 2 different types of insulin pumps, the Omnipod and the T-Slim. This pump and pod right here represents the Omnipod, which has a Bluetooth controller that connects to the pod on the user's body. I had this pump for about 9 years, and I really did like it. It's one of the only pumps that doesn't have external tubing, which is a definite plus. Though I recently changed to the T-Slim pump because of their Control IQ technology. This is really cool because it will connect to my Dexcom, or CGM, and will correct my blood sugar without me even having to give it any mind. It will increase my hourly rate of insulin if my blood sugar does go high, and it will decrease my hourly rate of insulin if my blood sugar goes low. It's basically a pancreas, and the only thing I have to do is give myself insulin at mealtime, which has been amazing for my blood sugar. And now moving on, I have talked about these cool pieces of technology, but I'm going to touch briefly on the more simplistic pieces of technology that those cool pumps and CGMs did replace. New diabetics, or those who don't want to move to CGMs and pumps, will be found using these. So right up here, this is an example of a glucose meter. There's a bunch of different types. This is just kind of a general example. So one will prick their finger and let the strip on the meter take the blood, and it will detect the blood sugar. Right here is a pretty average looking syringe that one will use to give fast acting and long acting insulin. They're pretty basic and a lot of diabetics don't really use them regularly. And lastly, down here, these are insulin pens. They come pre-filled with the insulin and can be wound up to the desired dosage. The needle is considerably smaller than a normal syringe, and most diabetics that aren't on pumps use these. They have different pens for different types of insulin, so you can't just inject it into a vial. You have to buy the specific pen for the specific type of insulin you use. One downfall with using these manual types of technology, you do have to calculate everything for yourself, whereas a pump will do that all for you and makes management a lot easier. So with that, do we have any questions? Feel free to unmute or ask them in the chat.
I was just wondering, is there any issues with like getting infections with having a permanent pump?
So pumps actually are not permanent. I did not touch on this. You have to change it every 3 days because if insulin is left in a like bag that the pump holds it in, it will crystallize and then you can't use the insulin. So you have to change it every 3 days. So the cannula that's inside your body is changed pretty routinely. So there is no really risk of infection, but you also do need to be very clean with everything. So it's a very cautious process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. At what age will you? It's kind of varies. It used to be called juvenile type 1 diabetes, but people are more moving to call it type 1 diabetes now. I got diagnosed whenever I was 7. People have gotten diagnosed in their teens. Very rare that you'll get diagnosed as an adult, but more in the early childhood ages. Yeah, I never had issues with my immune system being weak before I got type 1 diabetes, but now after I do have 2 autoimmune disorders, my immune system is a lot weaker than other people, so I do need to be like cautious of infectious disease. Yes, autoimmune disorders do have immune suppressing impacts. And yes, with that, diabetes does affect your COVID risk. That put me in group 1B for I guess a relative term of how at risk I am. So I do have to take extra precautions. Physical symptoms. This kind of varies for low blood sugar. This kind of varies from person to person. Personally, I experience that one chest feeling, but that's kind of internal. External, people around me can tell that I get a little sweaty, I get pale, I get a little shaky, and very much so, I get very irritable, I get very angry. You can definitely tell people that are friends with me, they know that my blood sugar gets low because I am a little bit cranky. So type 1 diabetes, it can be hereditary. So if you have a history of it in the family, it can manifest in you. But no one's really born with it. It kind of just happens. No one really knows the real cause with autoimmune disorders. It could be an environmental factor that caused your immune system to mistakenly attack itself. But there's currently more research going into that. And there is not a vaccine to prevent type 1 diabetes. There are clinical trials testing out to see if the TB vaccine is an adequate treatment for type 1 diabetes and regulating blood sugar, but that has not been released by the FDA, so it's still in the early trial phases. Yes, people with diabetes can use service animals. I actually had a service animal for about 1.5 years. I still use him at home, but he could smell my high blood sugar and my low blood sugar, and he would paw me whenever my blood sugar would go high or low, and I would physically check. That was before I had my Dexcom CGM. All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
What should someone's a normal blood sugar be?
So a normal blood sugar would be for someone without diabetes 100 to 180, and your body will kind of regulate that on your own.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, diabetes can have an impact on your retina. I haven't had any experience with that because I've been pretty well managed with my high blood sugar, but my glasses are kind of just, I have bad vision, but I do go to a doctor and they look back in my eye and they can tell if it's my high blood sugar that's affecting that or just I have bad vision. And yes, my service animal was a dog. So if you see someone with diabetes who has a low or a high blood sugar, they will most likely know what they have to do. They will most likely give themselves insulin. Backseat driving a type 1 diabetic, I know that a lot of them don't like that, But with a low blood sugar, that's a little bit more cause for alarm, and just making sure that they sit still. I know a lot of diabetics don't like to, but they need to sit still for at least 15 minutes and take their corrective juice or glucose tablets or any type of quick sugar, and then they can get up after their blood sugar has risen. Did this disease impact the direction I wanted to go with my career and life goals? I would say yes. I got this disease at a very early age, but then that made me have to go to doctor's offices all the time, and now I want to be a pediatrician. So I do think that that did have an impact on what I wanted to do, but I don't think it hindered me in anything that I did want to do. The benefits of service animals compared to traditional technology, I would say on a companion level, diabetes can get a little bit lonely if you do not have a support system. I luckily have an amazing support system, so the service animal is just an added benefit. But before CGMs were kind of a thing, service animals were really useful, and it's one less needle stick that you have to do, because type 1 diabetics do have to do a lot of needle sticks. So I think it's just kind of that human emotion that kind of helps. Disposing of needles safely, that's a really good question. There are sharps containers you can buy, but our doctor recommended us to use a detergent bottle. And so we open up the top of the detergent bottle, put in your needles and your sharps, and then you close it. And after it's full, you just tape it and you throw it away. That's really the safest way to dispose of your needles, or you can get a sharps container, but those I think are pretty expensive. Do I feel like people perceive me differently or treat me differently whenever they learn I have diabetes? I think so, yes. Oddly enough, more so adults. I feel like there was like an old way of thinking with type 1 diabetes in the way that people thought that I can't really do activity, I can't eat what I want to, and I've kind of just got to be like shut away in a box. But sorry, my dogs are barking. So I think that adults a lot of the time are kind of like, oh, are you sure you need to eat that? Or especially in elementary school, they're like, oh, we'll bring broccoli or vegetables to the party so you can eat while the other kids have like cookies or stuff. And I feel like that made me very frustrated, and I had to kind of always be correcting adults, and kids kind of were a little bit more accepting of it. And I've had the same group of friends kind of all the way up through high school, so I haven't really had to explain it much. But even whenever I meet new people, they kind of just accept the information, while adults kind of like to try and combat it. Weirdest assumptions and stereotypes. The food thing. I don't know why a lot of people have really, they just are so dead set on that I can't eat sugar. And I tell them, no, I can. And then they're still saying, no, I can't eat sugar. I also had that same family friend that told me whole milk was what caused my diabetes, told me to drink bone broth, and that would cure it. So very weird. How can someone with high diabetes get it to be lower? So with a high blood sugar, you just get that to be lower with insulin. There's not really a severity type with diabetes. Everyone has a different type of sensitivity to insulin. So that's kind of between the diabetic and their doctor. You could dispose of them at a doctor, but type 1 diabetics use so many needles all of the time, and I don't think that a doctor would actually accept them. I'm not sure about that. I've never heard of a place doing that, but if someone was really concerned about it, they could easily get a sharps container in their home. Diabetes, it was a little hard whenever I was little, because all of my friends around me didn't have to take time and go to the nurse before eating lunch. They didn't have to sit out of activity because their blood sugar went low, but I did have a really great support system with my family. So, and the school nurse. My school nurse at elementary school was amazing. So it kind of just became a part of my life, and I got it so early, like second grade. So it was kind of just, it's been normal life for me. Right now I am in high school. Diabetes does not affect how you physically look. It doesn't cause any weight gain. It doesn't cause any weight loss, except for whenever it's not treated. So there's no really difference. You can't tell on the outside that I am diabetic. So the difference between type 1 and type 2, type 1 is what I have. It's kind of where your body attacks itself and just beats up those beta cells until they can't work anymore. And then you have to manually give yourself insulin. And then type 2 is a little bit different. It is where you it's usually caused by something else like hereditary genetics. Let me just say genetics. And obesity is kind of related to type 2 diabetes, and it's where your body doesn't make enough insulin and to use the glucose, so it kind of just builds up. Hyperglycemia, the specific biological mechanism that underlies type 1 diabetes. So hyperglycemia is a symptom of type 1 diabetes. So, hypoglycemia, those are symptoms. They're not like underlying that causes it. The pancreas is not the only organ that's affected by diabetes. My pancreas still works and does all of the other amazing digestive things, but if you cannot manage your diabetes, it can affect other organs such as the eyes, it can affect your skin, it can affect your digestive system if you aren't managing it. But if you do have really good management, it should only affect your pancreas. I do have to give myself insulin for the rest of my life. Type 1 diabetes doesn't currently have a cure, but in the future, if a cure was able to be made, it would probably be preventative. I think the most promising technology currently is the Control-IQ on the t:slim, because all I have to do is give myself insulin for meal times and never have to worry about anything else. But the same company that made this Control-IQ is also working towards making an artificial pancreas. So I think that is very promising for the future. Would having type 1 diabetes be a worry if you need surgery or any type of such work on sorts of your pancreas? I feel like your doctor will take into account that you use insulin, so they'd have to be monitoring your blood sugar while you are under anesthesia. But working in the pancreas, it would be, if you're doing surgery on the pancreas, I don't think it would be that big of a deal, because my pancreas doesn't work for insulin, but it will work for other things. So the pancreas still is there. It's still doing its job, but not in the way that I need it to completely. Does diabetes affect you differently as you age, or does it always affect you the same? Whenever you're a teenager, especially a female, you have a lot of different hormones. So in your teenage years, managing blood sugar is a little bit harder. As you're a kid, you go low a lot more often. So that's something you have to deal with. But whenever you're an adult, kind of get like maybe 25 and over, it levels out a little bit more. So it may be easier to manage in like retrospect to your teenage years. In developing countries, diabetes is not as often addressed. Insulin is very expensive to make, and the places that manufacture it do have a monopoly on it. I know the United States has a very big monopoly on insulin, and other countries around the world do not. So I guess like foreign aid would be one of the best ways that diabetes is addressed. But in Europe, there are a lot of different clinical trials and things that make diabetes a lot more easy to be treated, and insulin is a lot less costly. So the surrounding countries can rely on their neighboring countries for help. Insulin, yes, insulin is very expensive. Pancreas transplants, there is a lot of risk that does come with that, and it might cure diabetes, but no one would really want to take the risk to transplant your pancreas in concern that other functions would not work. It is definitely something that's being studied, but other people also might need pancreases more than a type 1 diabetic. Like if your pancreas isn't doing its digestive functions, that's a lot worse and not manageable, unlike type 1 diabetes, which can be managed. Diabetes can affect your eyes. So if your blood sugar runs high all the time, all of that glucose and acid builds up, and it can build up behind your eyes and cause like a screen. It's kind of like, not cataracts, but it's kind of similar. So it would build up this film, and it would just cause your eyes to deteriorate. And it can do that to any part of your body, like your skin and eyes are two big ones. My current most prominent struggle as a student with diabetes is getting teachers to accommodate me having to maybe leave class for a low blood sugar, or my many doctor's appointments that I have to go to. They're not very receptive with that. Can stem cells be used to override the lack of insulin production like sickle cell, or the problems originating far too different to similar therapies? There are actually studies going on looking at that, but it's kind of, using stem cells is kind of controversial in a few different communities. So it's kind of being like just introduced. Funding has been kind of lax over the past 20 years, but research is really showing promise. And I think that there are some intense clinical trials that do use stem cells. Type 1 diabetes cannot develop into type 2. Whenever you've been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, you never have to worry about getting type 2. Completely different. If type 1 diabetes is not addressed, you will go into diabetic ketoacidosis like I talked about, and then there will be just negative effects as your weight deteriorates very rapidly, and as the acid builds up, you can go into a coma and most likely will not wake up if not given insulin. So low and high blood sugars, they are both pretty dangerous. For me, I'm more afraid of going low because the feeling makes my cognitive function decrease rapidly. High blood sugar is not good, but I feel like low is a lot more scary because it deteriorates a lot faster and you lose your cognitive function, which makes you a little bit more anxious. I honestly am not sure that stem cells can be used to make insulin, but I will definitely look into that. Animals can develop diabetes. I think that it's very prominent in cats. I know that a lot of people have cats that have type 1 diabetes. There's no really way to define if type 1 or type 2 is worse. Type 1 is manageable, type 2 is manageable. Type 1 uses needles and shots, type 2 uses mainly pills, and type 2 can be cured. Type 2 can be like not cured in a sense, but it can be managed to an extent where it kind of leaves the risk factor. I do not get exemptions for tests, but I do get sometimes extra time if my blood sugar does go low. For standardized tests like AP tests and SAT, ACT, all of that, I'm able to take it with one proctor instead of in a group, and that makes me able to like stop the time and go take my insulin or go fix my blood sugar because I am technically not supposed to be working whenever my blood sugar is low, so I would have to physically stop for like 15 minutes. Blood sugar has no relation to blood pressure. I mean, if you do have high blood sugar and you aren't taking care of yourself like that, your blood pressure may run higher, but not very connected. Foot amputations with type 2 diabetes, that can also happen with type 1, but that's very rare. That's if you do not manage your type 1 diabetes and you don't manage your high blood sugar. The important thing with type 1 is to continue your management, and then you won't have complications like with your skin or your eyes, because that would come from getting an infection on the skin and it spreads down deep, and then you have to get an amputation. So there are a lot of people in the world with type 1 diabetes, but I know in the United States alone, there's 1.25 million that have type 1. Type 1 does not affect my sleep. On the surface level, whenever my blood sugar is low, I do have to wake up and stay awake until it goes up, but other than that, it doesn't really affect it. And no, I do not have to follow any diets. A lot of people try to suggest keto to me. Doesn't work like that. If I had a keto diet, I would go into DKA because I wouldn't have glucose. So no specific diets. So obesity and type 2 diabetes do kind of go hand in hand, but type 2 can come even if you aren't obese. If you lose weight, your insulin demands may go away. It kind of depends on what type of type 2 you have. But I think it just becomes more manageable. But obesity is a risk factor for type 2 diabetes. I'm not sure when type 1 diabetes was first discovered in humans because it has been a thing. It has been here. But the first treatment was discovered on a dog. Actually, insulin was first used on a dog with diabetes, and that's whenever they realized, oh my gosh, we can treat this. But usually people with diabetes would kind of just wither away. What would you recommend people to manage, take care of that you've learned the hard way or just learned over time? I would say taking time to carb count, not like counting your carbs and restricting, more like being able to quickly add carbs that you see on your plate and guessing what they are to an accurate estimate, because you don't want to spend like 20 minutes looking up the carbs of what you're eating and then having to bolus, which is giving yourself insulin for it. Guesstimating is what I call it. That has become very useful for me, and it has let my life be a lot easier than me having to like open up MyFitnessPal and see the carb counts and all of that. An endocrinologist is the doctor that deals with the endocrine system. So they deal with hypothyroid, hyperthyroid, diabetes, all of the endocrine disorders. So my service animal helps with detecting my high and low blood sugar. He would smell it. I know it's really weird, but he could smell my high and my low. My high to him would smell more sweet, and my low would smell more, I guess, sour. And then he would paw me, and he would get a reward whenever he pawed and was correct. And yes, there will be a quiz after. That will be on the attendance form. Diabetes has affected my life positively. I think like the biggest way would be we have an amusement park near us. This is like the best ever side effect of diabetes is I get a fast pass and I can kind of just bypass the lines. My favorite thing to do ever. So I got diagnosed, yes, fast pass is amazing. I got diagnosed whenever I was about 7 and I did have all the telltale signs. I didn't have hunger. I wasn't very hungry, but I did drink so much water. I drank a lot for a 7-year-old. I had lost a lot of weight. It was very evident. I was like skin and bone. You could literally see my bone, like my bones, within my skin, and I became very tired. I was a soccer player. I would never be able to run at soccer practice like all my friends, and I kind of just laid down all day and did absolutely nothing. So that's a really good question. What breed of dog they use for service animals? So they use usually labs. They do have golden doodles and golden retrievers. Those are their main that they use, and they can use other ones, but those are the ones with the strongest like scent that they can have readily available. I have a mix of a golden retriever and a lab, and that is my service animal. So I didn't train our service animal like my service animal. We went through a company called Diabetic Dogs for America, I think that's what it's called, and they're based out of Arizona. And they train the dogs from birth, and so they then just train them, and it takes about a year and a half. So the attendance form will be sent out after I'm done with all the questions. Diabetes could be in my genes, but it could also be from environmental factors. So you could have a history of it in your family, and that's what causes your immune system to attack itself, or something in your environment could have caused that. But there's more research going into that now. All right, anything else? Do I feel like I do, to a point, feel like diabetes has created a community for me. I'm not friends with a lot of other type 1 diabetics. I'm friends with like one, mostly because I kind of don't like talking about it that much to an extent of like with other type 1 diabetics, if that makes sense. It's kind of it becomes the only subject that we talk about together as friends. So the entire friendship would be based on like talking about type 1 diabetes, but there are support groups and stuff, and I did go to those whenever I was like little, and that was fun. But there is definitely a community there. For me, the doctor's office, I have to go to my endocrinologist every 3 months, but I think whenever I'm an adult, it will change to 6 months, and that's just to check up and check my all my blood levels and everything. There are environmental factors that can worsen symptoms. They're kind of studying which specific ones can, because there's not really like a, like causation, correlation, all of that. There's not really a specific study that has said which environmental factors, but they have seen like people in this region have higher diagnosis rate of type 1 diabetes. So there's definitely more studies going into that, because you have to counter in the like migration of people and where they originally were. I don't think that there are any other service animals for diabetes other than dogs. I know cats are service animals for like epilepsy, and I actually have heard of miniature horses being, I'm not joking, miniature horses being service animals. That was in like our school's policy book, like whenever we got my service dog. So I don't know what they're used for, but I know that they are service animals. So I think it's only dogs. I do use my phone to address my blood sugar. My Dexcom actually does connect to my phone. It looks like this. My blood sugar is actually high right now, so that's fun. But it kind of shows a graph, and I can see like where it was. I just ate lunch, so it kind of bumped up. Diabetes, I don't think there are any studies done on the effects on different genders. I know that females, sometimes in the middle of the night, they'll dump glucose from the liver, and that'll make their blood sugar rise, or they have more hormones going on during like puberty, so that makes their blood sugar a little bit harder to manage, but that's it. diabetes has changed my perspective on life in that life goes on even if you've had like a rough day. Life goes on even if you've gotten a bad diagnosis. Life goes on. Oh, yes, that's a cat. It's my cat in the background. She has a little holder. So whenever I do go on a plane, I do have to turn my phone on airplane mode, but that doesn't take away the Bluetooth. My phone connects to my Dexcom via Bluetooth, so that's not really something to worry about. But whenever I do go through TSA, I have to get like a hand pat down instead of a going through the scanner because it will mess up my technology. All right. Anything else? All right. Thank you all for coming. For the one person that asked if that was a salt lamp, yes, that is. I have had issues with faulty readings on my manual blood sugar checker whenever I didn't have my Dexcom, but it's not really a problem now that I have my Dexcom. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for your time. I love being able to present today. So if you have any other questions, feel free to contact me at this email address if you have any other questions that come to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emily, for presenting. This is such an amazing presentation. I definitely learned more about it. Everyone, I'm gonna post the attendance form now for everyone. And Emily, whenever you want to leave, you can leave if you want.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, for listening to my presentation. Bye, have a great day.
Have a great day, everyone. Have a great day, Emily.